All right, so good afternoon. This is our session on academic classroom environment. We are both sixth grade teachers, and the strategies that we're showing you today align with the Wit and Wisdom curriculum, but they also can be applied to other content areas as well, not just specifically ELA specific. So if you teach something else, Ms. Pardue, you should hopefully still be able to take away some things that you can use in your classroom as well. So my name is Bailey Stufek. This past school year, I taught sixth grade ELA at Grantham Academy. And I taught primarily beginning and intermediate ESL students. So I taught with Miss Sneed at Grantham.
And I am Nathaniel Peak, and I'm a sixth grade ELA teacher at Hoffman Middle School. And this year, all three of my blocks were, my virtual and my one block were beginning and intermediate as well.
Okay, so our norms and expectations for today, we ask that your cameras are on just so we can see your beautiful, smiling, enthusiastic faces for this summer PD. And we ask that you please contribute to the conversation, either by coming off of mute or dropping in the chat. And to be in an environment that's conducive to contribution, our sessions are better when we have feedback from y'all and discussion. So we'd love to hear from y'all today as we consider what strategies will be able to be applied in your own classroom environments. Our objective for today is teachers will know what contributes to an academic classroom environment. Teachers will understand the variety of strategies that can be used to increase student engagement. And teachers will be able to discuss how to promote an academic environment in their own classrooms in the upcoming school year.
Okay, we're going to get started off with word walls. And word walls are a simple but necessary resource for students to reference during every lesson. So this is not just EL students, this is for all students, okay? But especially our EL students need this. And some types of word walls, you may not have all of these, but I just wanted to go over some of the types there are. So high frequency sight words, that might be beneficial for some beginner students, maybe some who have just left the new arrival program. There's an academic word wall, which are tier 2 vocabulary words, a content area word wall, which we will often see in art, science, math. We see those kinds of words, and those are tier 3 words. So percent, photosynthesis, foreground, background in art. And then unit or chapter word wall, which in ELA classrooms, we generally have these just to help support our students in their comprehension of our text that we're reading. You might also consider trying a parts of speech word wall. Or just an anchor chart for parts of speech, especially for our EL students. They need to not only know vocabulary, but they need to know how those connect to form ideas. So when we're expecting our EL students to read and have fluency, we don't want to hear them pronounce the words correctly. We want to hear them read ideas, right? And then also maybe a prefixes, suffixes, or vowel digraphs. This will just help them decode new vocabulary words. Prefixes, suffixes, affixes in general are context clues that help them better understand these new words that they come across. Okay, there are two main types of creation for word walls. There's the teacher created word wall and the student created word wall. Okay, I just want to make that clear. So last year in my classroom, I had a teacher created word wall because I was focused on pacing in my classroom and also just navigating the constant changes that were happening throughout the year. And I just felt like I needed that resource for them, and that's the one thing I could control in the classroom as far as everything that was going on. Word walls should include words, of course, parts of speech for those words, cognates or translations, definitions, and a graphic representation. Usually a picture. Students can draw. They can show their creativity in that way. And also, if possible, word relationships. If you come to our academic vocabulary session, we have an activity where we introduce you to an activity where we're connecting words and ideas and having students explain them. Here are features of traditional and interactive word walls. So the traditional word wall will have lists of words in alphabetical order. The teacher usually creates it. It's up all year. It never changes. It, of course, has words, and the words typically are random. So they may not have a theme or a unit. They're just up on the wall. Interactive word walls, some of their qualities include thematic or unit-based. They may be in a graphic organizer format. They're usually student created and centered, and they change with each unit or a text or however your curriculum is structured. Words and pictures or real objects. This past year, there was a 6th grade teacher who, for our myth, I think it was module 2, she got like these plastic shields and helmets and stuff, and she put them on the wall next to some words. So that was more tangible things that helped our students connect and engage with the vocabulary. And words that are related to specific grade level standards. Here's an example. I unfortunately did not take a picture of my word wall, so I created one here for you. But this is what my word wall looked like this past year. So I'd have the word, this part of speech, the translation in parentheses, and then I point out to the students that these translations, particularly on this slide, are called cognates. So cognates are words that look and sound similar in English and their first language. Also the definition, and I had beginner intermediate, so I would often try to find a simplified definition for my students. And then pictures. The bottom describe has maybe a student drawing where they're describing people who have helped other people. So it's a graphic representation. Okay. Here's an example of a student generated, and you'll notice it's the science classroom. We can do this in ELA classrooms or in art, especially, that would be cool. Students generate and maintain these word walls, and they're anchors that will likely be more effective and engaging for them because they created them. So you'll see in this picture, there are graphic representations, and they have words with everyone kind of contributing. This may be too much for your classroom. I've had students, I put up a word and then for homework, I say, okay guys, I need a picture for this word. Who's gonna provide it for me? And then they all bring me one and we all vote on it together. So it's kind of a competition of sorts, but it's also exciting and engaging. And they'll be more likely to reference it when they have to use it in their writing. Visuals are a must, and they must accompany vocabulary. So this is a word that's in module 1 in our text Bud Not Buddy, and it's lavatory. And probably all of us might know this word, but for sure my beginner, intermediate, maybe advanced students may not know what this word is. They may think lava because they see that, and then they may think, is it hot? But it's really just a restroom. But if they see this picture, they'll immediately go, oh, I know exactly what that is. I did not put the translation because baño in Spanish is kind of far from it. And so if this picture is good enough for them, I would not. If the picture was foreign, I would include the translation. But if the translation is too far removed from what the English word looks like, sometimes it confuses them and they'll just rely on their L1. Okay, so speaking of visuals, I would like for us to do this game that I have done with my students. So last year, I was virtual the entire year. I had one block that came back in the middle of the year. But this is a fun way for you to get visuals that students connect with in a digital format that, usually is when I created the word wall, I was like having trouble finding pictures, and the pictures that I found my students didn't connect with, they didn't understand. So I put it in their hands and they felt ownership over it. So what we're gonna do is Ms. Stefik put the link in the chat. Oh, people are already there. My GT students. Miss Sneed is there. Miss Fowles is there. Okay, so this is basically an online picture hunt. So they would be using their Chromebooks. And I encourage you to not like put a cross up to technology. We are there, technology is here to stay. So any way that you can incorporate it in your classroom is a benefit. Okay, I would do this in the ELA curriculum maybe at the beginning of class, or if we had time left over at the very end of class because it's fun, or even for homework. And I would give incentives like candy or extra credit because this is an investment in my classroom and the students are investing in themselves. So basically, on the next few slides, this is what I would give them in Schoology. On the next few slides, you will find vocabulary words and their definitions. Google a picture that represents the word and then copy and paste the picture anywhere on the slide. See the example slide below. So here I've given them the example of test, and it's a verb. And the definition is to give someone or something a trial or challenge to determine their quality. Now, trial, they may not know, but challenge, I'm sure that they have heard. Quality, I'm sure that they've heard. But most of them will come back with pictures that say exam on it, or like a test grade or an A+ or 100%. But I wanted to show them in my example that there are many ways to show a test. So rock climbing, testing yourself, a judge looking down at you, a swimmer in the Olympics is testing themselves and they're trying to win, and then two students playing chess. So the cool thing about this, and we're about to do it, the cool thing about this is that students will come up with really incredible things, and after you're all done, we'll be able to vote on which one do we want in our classroom, right? And at the end of your day, if you have 3 blocks, you'll have 3, or if you're an art teacher, you may have more. But in ELA, we have blocks, so you would have 3 pictures around that word. So each class will have their own little representation. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slides. We have transformation, cope, endure, depression, and hardships. These 5 words come in the first 5 lessons, 5 or 6 lessons of Module 1. So these students will be encountering these, but I would like for you to now Google a picture, copy it, and paste it on here. Whatever you think represents it. You can choose your word, and we'll give you about 4 minutes.
4 minutes. That's you. Google a picture.
Mm-hmm. I know it's really hard.
For me.
Yeah. Oh, it is?
I'm very technology challenged.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Okay. So let me give you something. So you just go to Google on your phone or whatever, and say you can type in transformation. And I usually type in PNG because it makes it a higher quality photo.
Okay.
And then you can just look for
a picture. And then...
So students might have learned this in science. So that might represent to them transformation.
Oh.
Body transformations.
Mm-hmm.
This is like my yearly goal. So I think that was God trying to put that up there. Sorry. This one is interesting. A person turning into a bird. So there's a variety. Oh, there's another one. So all you would do it, and then you would right click and then just copy image, and then
I'm gonna leave that area.
Yeah. And then paste it. And then you can resize it on the corner.
Okay.
And ultimately, if you're not wanting to spend a lot of time on this, you can choose just one word. Maybe at the end of class, after they do, while you're doing your wrap and you're explaining the homework in ELA, or at the end of your class when you're wrapping up class, you can have them do this really fast because we've worked on this word. So now we can find representations that will help us retain what this word means. And some words like depression have multiple meanings. So it could be a physical, a noun that's like a pothole in the road would be a depression, or a mental state for a person. Ooh, and I like this one. Hardships with a cracked head, cracked egg. Cope. It's very calm. Dealing with problems. Now, I do try to challenge my students sometimes with putting tier 2 words, bigger vocabulary words in the definition, but when I read it to them, I explain it in a more student-friendly language. Oh, that's good. So then after your students have pasted all of their pictures, they can keep this. You can keep this in their Schoology for reference, but then you can take one of these pictures and print it out and put it up next to the word. I do encourage you to find a way for it to be removed and put back. I usually use like Tiki-Tack or something. That way they can use these interactively. Ooh, I like this one, that endure. It's awesome. Okay, I hope y'all enjoyed that. I really love it. My students love it.
And I'm now going to talk to y'all about anchored charts and classroom visuals. So I'm going to show you some examples, some pictures from my room this past year of different ways you can engage your learners through visuals in your classroom. But before I show you the examples, I'd like to hear from some of y'all. So I invite you to either come off of mute or drop in the chat a response to this question on the next slide. So I want to know, what was your process for generating anchor charts from the Wit and Wisdom curriculum in the previous school year? What parts of that curriculum did you find most beneficial taking from that curriculum and putting on anchor charts in your room? Which ones were your kids accessing the most, or were they accessing them? Where did you find them successful? I just want to kind of hear your thought process on how you created those anchor charts in your room this past year. And as a scaffold, we wanted to model some scaffolds for y'all. We put a sentence stem at the bottom. So if you want to use a sentence stem, you could say, I created anchor charts based on.
So one of the biggest anchor charts I used every 9 weeks was a character list. And mine got more detailed after looking at Miss Steffick's, but definitely keeping that up. And I remember at one point we were reading Blood on the River, third 9 weeks, and I had taken my character list down because of stars. I don't know what, something happened and I had to take it down. And my kids, I remember them like turning and looking and going, where's that chart? So that one is going to be a lot nicer this year because I have time and thought processes. But that's a definite one that I took from Wit and Wisdom.
Awesome. Yeah, and Miss Sneed utilizes every square inch of her free space in her classroom for anchor charts. So she did a fantastic job of giving her students visual cues around her room to look at. So anybody else, how y'all created anchor charts based on Wit and Wisdom? Which ones were successful for you this past year?
Our director, she let us create, I don't know if it was last year, the year before, but we created portable anchor charts for our art class, like on value, watercolor techniques. And I did show them these, but we didn't use it very much, which I could have because I was on campus and also did virtual, but.
The idea of portable ones is good because you can, switch them out.
Yeah, we switched them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
And it's good to track what's working and what's not. Like you may think an anchor chart is really going to be useful to them and they don't use it. So that's good to track. And maybe it's the way your anchor chart was set up. Maybe you need to evaluate that. But yeah, that's awesome.
Awesome. So I'm gonna show you some examples of just the things that are commonly found around my classroom. The first one that Ms. Sneed mentioned is the character anchor chart. So I actually didn't do this for module 1, but the need became very apparent when we hit module 2. We were reading Ramayana and the Odyssey, and we were having these names from Hindu and Greek mythology that were very foreign to our students. So the need was kind of shown to us pretty early on in module 2 that this was a scaffold that our kids were going to need to reference the text, and to talk about the character development that they were seeing in the text. They needed to be able to know those characters, actually know who they were. So my character anchor charts have the name of the character and then also a just short text-based definition of who that character is within that story. So you'll see on the left, it is for module 3 book, Blood on the River. On the right is the module 4 book, Shipwreck at the Bottom of the World. And so these were really good tools for our students to be able to reference. Like Ms. Sneed said, when we ask our kids a question, we want the answer to be based in text evidence. And if they're talking about a character, we want them to know who that character is. So if they can't supply that on their own from just memory, make them physically look at that anchor chart, turn their body, look at it, search for the person that they're looking for, and then say their answer. And that just really reinforces one, just comprehension of the story, because then they're retelling parts of the story that other students are able to then listen to as well, to kind of reinforce that comprehension of the story elements and what's happening in the story. So that's definitely an anchor chart I would recommend for y'all next year.
And Ms. Pardue, in art, if there's artwork that you're looking at that you want your students to tell the difference between, or artists that you want them to identify, you can do the same thing with this, where their students are gathering evidence to support what they think about an artist or what they think about a piece of art.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, and then so this would be an example of a task-specific anchor chart, one that has step-by-step instructions. So this comes from Module 3 of the Wit and Wisdom curriculum for 6th grade, and that's the module where we get into argumentative or persuasive writing. And so all of the ideas on this anchor chart actually come from a Wit and Wisdom lesson. I want to say it's 15, but don't quote me on the exact number, but it kind of, they're working on a focusing question task, and it is just a step-by-step process laid out just for us as teachers to kind of be able to explain to them, or for us to know what the process of writing is. So that information should definitely be given to our kids in a procedural step-based format, because ESL students really respond positively to having a step-by-step instructions for a big idea of something we're going to do, right? Argumentative writing is a thought process. So one, at the top of the anchor chart, it defines what argumentative writing is based on Wit and Wisdom's definition. It requires writers to state a claim and prove it. So you are picking an opinion, choosing a side, and then using text evidence to support your opinion. So those steps to the argumentative writing is, first, look at all the evidence. My students had a tendency, they saw the prompt and they were ready to pick a side right off the bat without having looked at the evidence to decide, is there enough evidence for me to base a whole paper on or a whole paragraph on? So looking at that evidence first is an important step, and one that they may not have known to do without this anchor chart, okay? So it tells them, look at all the evidence, state a claim or pick a side, give the reason you picked that claim or chose that side, and then select evidence that supports your claim. So you could also use this anchor chart to model for your students, to model the thought process of, if I'm writing a response to a question where I'm having to pick a claim and support it with evidence, then I could model for them. Okay, first I'm going to look at all the evidence. Second, I'm going to decide which side of the claim I want to write about based upon the evidence that's listed, show them the process for it, show them the writing process of giving the reason, and then selecting the evidence that supports that claim. So anytime you can give your ELs sort of a step-by-step guide of a thought process, one, you're going to model for them. Two, you're going to express it in language. You're going to tell them, right? But three, for them to be able to look at it as well. That is addressing multiple modalities, and it is able to engage your visual learners, your auditory learners, and it actually gives them sort of a frame for doing it themselves whenever they get to that independent argumentative writing. Another big thing we use in our class are sentence stems. So sentence stems is a scaffold that we use every day pretty much in my classroom, because it's a scaffold that just allows them to have that extra help with getting started with their productive language, that speaking or that writing. So the left hand side of the picture tell them to reference whenever they're writing out that evidence in a paragraph. That's supported, they're answering a question, then their answer has to be supported by text evidence. It also can be used in speech, but more commonly my students would kind of access those on the left in a writing task, and more commonly the ones on the right would be when we're discussing a prompt. And so they can be interchangeable, right? You can use them for speaking or writing, but I kind of try to separate them so that they could look at like one column at a time. If we're doing a text-based or evidence-based response, then they're going to be looking at that left-hand side column. And so it's just giving them that extra support to create those sentences that actually show their learning in a way that's like grade level appropriate.
And something that's great about sentence stems is you're forcing them to use academic vocabulary because it's in the sentence frame. So there's no option, they can't option out of it. They have an option with the blanks where they explain usually that academic word or use that academic word. But I also wanted to mention Ms. Calderon for EL teachers. At the beginning of the year, she's going to provide sentence strips that are laminated. So you'll be able to use them, erase them, and reuse them. And she's really excited about it. And we're really excited about it. So we wanted to tell you.
Awesome. So KWL chart, something I'm sure y'all have heard of before, but I wanted to specify how it lives in my classroom. So this chart stays up in my classroom, and anytime a student has a question that they genuinely want to know the answer to, and I maybe don't have time to address it during the lesson itself, I'll tell them to put it on a sticky note, put it on my KWL chart, and that's a good way to engage your students because it's questions that they actually want to know the answers to, right? And so that's important. But then alternatively, whenever we do a notice and wonder in my class, after they've noticed and wonder, if there's like one question in that wonder that's really they are maybe struggling with, or they just like, Ms. Novak, I feel like I need to know this to understand the book or whatever it may be. From the notice and wonder charts, I also, after they fill it out in their journal, I'll give them sticky notes and say, okay, pick the most important question that you feel like you need answered, and then they'll put that on the KWL chart too. So it's a good way to like assess student understanding, to increase student engagement, and aligns really well with the Wit and Wisdom curriculum because those noticings and wonderings are things that that's a strategy or a routine that we do quite often in this curriculum. And so this is a way to build that knowledge. And then, as we go throughout the module, there will be things where that they wanted to know first, but then that they learned, right? Or that now it's background knowledge for them at that point. So using the same KWL chart like over the course of a module can show you kind of the progress of students learning as well. And one more thing that we're talking about to increase student engagement. Again, we're not reinventing the wheel here, but these are really good engagement scaffolds. On the right is a picture of something called equity sticks. So they're popsicle sticks that have my students' names on them. They have a green dot on one side and a red dot on the other. And so they'll live in a cup on my desk, and my students know when I pick that cup up, they have a chance of being called on. So they don't always love it, but they know that they're like, oh, okay, we have to really pay attention now. Or we have to, we know that there's a chance that we could get called on to share out our responses. But I do also want to be cognizant of my students who have a lower level of language production and who are still beginning and intermediate students and may their language just production might be less than the other students in the classroom. So I have this scaffold in place. If I called their name and they were paying attention and I could see that they were participating, but if they can't tell me, instead of I don't know, they have an option from picking those three questions at the top of the anchor chart. Either can I have more information, can you repeat the question, or can I have more time to think? They have to choose one of those first. And then afterwards, if they still don't know, then they can ask a friend for help. Another way to kind of lower the stakes, I guess, of being able to share out. First, if it's a text-dependent question that we're responding to, instead of just doing it cold from whole group, I might give them some time to turn and talk with their partners, do a think, pair, share model. And so have in a small group setting, there's like less risk involved in just like speaking and saying your opinion. And that gives them a chance to kind of work out some ideas, hear from other students first, maybe a student that was able to come up with the right answer. They could hear it, have some time to talk about it, and then we'll come back whole group. And then I'll pull for an equity stick to someone who can contribute. So, if you frame your classroom as an environment where taking risks is just an important part of our learning process, an important part of our participation, they're more likely to be able to kind of buy into this protocol, even if they're on the lower end of the language production skills, even if they're beginners or intermediates. They have some ability to still interact with the content. And I just wanted to show y'all what my board looks like. So every day my cub is posted. On the right-hand side of the picture, you'll see the cub listed out. I also have the cub in my PowerPoint as well. You'll see that I color code parts of my cub. That strategy we're actually gonna go into detail in the academic vocabulary session that we give. And my essential question, my focus question, and my framing question are always displayed on my board. So the essential question, right, we know doesn't change for the whole module, right? So it's important for them to see that. That's the original language that it's written in, right? We haven't like rephrased it. I know in another session we talked about rephrasing that essential question at the beginning of the module to help our kids unlock the meaning of it. But we still want them to see the high level vocabulary day to day, because at the end of the module, they're going to have to respond in writing to that question in the EOM. Right? And along those same lines, our focus question is with us for an entire arc. So an arc in the module is a series of lessons. And at the end of those series of lessons, there's a focusing question task. And it's a writing task that they have to write towards and synthesize their learning over the last few lessons, right? So it's important for them to know that they're going to be held accountable to that question once we get to that lesson. So in our framing question, as we know, changes every day, right? So if I have a cub that is, so the focus question for this unit was, who has the greatest impact on Samuel's development during his time in Jamestown? And the two options, I'll just let y'all know if y'all don't remember, the two options were either Captain Smith or Reverend Hunt, right? If that's happening in lesson 10, and I'm teaching lesson 7, and in lesson 7, we analyze an exchange between Samuel and Captain Smith, I know that builds their ability to answer that focus question. So in my cub, if there's something that builds towards that focus question, I'll take a moment to say, this is important. Our work today is important because in 3 lessons, you're gonna have to write in response to this question. And this question is asking who has the greatest impact on Samuel's development. Well, in the text today, we're gonna see an exchange between Samuel and another character that impacts his development. So it's a good way to, again, increase accountability for them to know, hey, listen, when we hit lesson 10, we're going to be writing. And they're a little bit more accepting of that. They're not quite as resistant when they know that's coming, when they know that we're building those skills in them. So when we get to lesson 10, it's not we have to write. It's like, okay, I know we have to write. We're just going to get in here and do it. So that's a way to increase engagement as well.
And another shameless plug, many of us have already gone to this session, but the academic vocabulary Ms. Stefik has a great anchor chart for some of these vocabulary words like impact. You'll notice in the focusing question on her board, it says impact, and in the understand in the Cubs, it says impact, and also in the be able to. So that word, if your students don't know that word, she has a great anchor chart for whenever students come across words that are unfamiliar to them, that they come up with a class definition. That way, there's no obstacles. So they see all of these anchor charts around the room that are supporting them so that they can feel successful and feel confident in making an attempt and taking risks. Okay, and so now we're going to move on to timelines. And I don't know if y'all have heard of these, but it's basically a graphic representation of ideas, of organized ideas. And now that I said that out loud, I'm sure you've heard of timelines, but in this way, I don't know if you've heard. So as we all know, timelines are pieces of reference. So in books, we can have timelines of events. In history, we'll have timelines of events. In science, if you're doing an experiment, there may be a timeline. But timelines in this aspect can be started at the beginning of the year and be added throughout the year, culminating in a chart of knowledge. And you're about to see what that looks like. So it's basically a graphic representation on your wall or in your room that is tracking student knowledge. So here are some of the benefits. It's a point of reference for the students for where they're at today in their lesson. It solidifies acquired knowledge. It's a graphic organizer for which students can make connections between texts, between concepts, between the things that they've learned in the past. It's a tool for teachers to use when referring to that previous learning in preparation for new learning. And there's no need to wait until the end of the year for students to see how everything that they have learned each day connects to what's coming next. So I remember in Module 4, we had to refer back to the previous modules at the end of the year. And I was like, I had taken all that stuff down because it was a new module. And so this is a great way to kind of keep some of the previous stuff up there, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So here's an example of just the beginning of Module 1. And what I did was the top part of the timeline is basically the focusing question, but phrased in a way of what they learned. So the question may have been, what makes Bud a survivor? And so we said, we learned what makes Bud a survivor. And there's a graphic representation of what they learned. In this, instance, I found this picture online, but students may come up with something that they want to put up there and that other students connect with. There are pictures throughout the ELA curriculum that you can use to anchor the students' learning. Okay, you can reference this later on. I've highlighted words that are important. But this is like starting day one and kind of grows. So it grows and the students can be involved in this. This does not have to be you having to teach, prepare for teaching and doing all of this. This can be a project that the students have, and it's a way for them to just anchor their learning and to help them as they move on this journey. And here's kind of like the big idea. So through all the modules. And you can also change this up. So you can have different anchors. You can have, instead of pictures, you can have student work, exceptional student work up there. You can have artwork that students generated, major themes or major concepts, or even conventions, writing conventions that they've learned, or vocabulary strategies that they've learned. Because sometimes when you ask students, okay guys, do you remember the outside in vocabulary strategy? They're like, what? And then if they have this reference of like, oh, I did do that, I'm confident in that, I remember that. It's just a very quick and easy way that you can add to this large timeline throughout the year. Okay, so thinking about timelines, also, if you're like Ms. Sneed and you're like, my wall space is valuable, if you're near other teachers in your grade level, you can use the hallway as your timeline and share it with colleagues. And your students walking through the hallways, administrators walking through the hallways will see your students learning. They'll see their growth. But how do you think you might be able to use the timeline in your classroom? And if you think you can use a timeline in your classroom, what information might you include on it? I mean, you could just do a timeline on the texts and have the major events or the major themes. Any ideas? You can go ahead and unmute yourself and share out just what your thinking is right now of how this might be applicable in your room and what you might include on your timeline. What information do you think your students would benefit from?
Okay. So literally right before you said that, I was thinking of the lockers in our hallway, and like the ones right outside my room could be module 1 and so on and so forth down our 6th grade hallway. I love this idea. I would have never in a million years thought of a timeline for ELA like this. And yes, I was picturing my room and figuring like, okay, which wall can I like take away and like put this on? I love it. And I think I mean, knowing that module 4 goes back and discusses all of the modules, I would definitely want to look back and really study what the EOM for module 4 was and make sure that those specific things are on that timeline so that when they get back to that, because that was one of the things at the end, like you said, all my stuff was done and it's already been packed away by the time they're writing this EOM, and half of them were virtual. It was a big mess. So I think this would be amazing. I like it.
I totally agree. I hadn't thought about this strategy either. When Mr. Peak showed me, I was like, oh my gosh, we have to do this next year. Like, it's so important, especially because our modules build upon each other. Like, the first essential question we have in module 1 is how can enduring tremendous hardship contribute to personal transformation? We see characters going through difficulties and transforming throughout the entire year. And so that knowledge just builds upon each other. And then we're asked to reflect on it at the end of the year. So that would be a really good strategy to use. Anybody else want to share how it might live in your classroom or at your school?
Now, if you think about when you're learning, like in a PD session, and don't you want to know, okay, oh, I did learn that. Like sometimes you walk away and you're like, what did I really learn? But if you have notes, you're taking notes, oh, I did learn some things. Your students are going to feel the same way. If they see a graphic representation of the past in the school year, they're going to feel more confident that they are learning, that their knowledge is growing, their background knowledge is expanding. And in art, I'm trying to think, it depends on how your curriculum is organized.
Right, that's what we usually start out the beginning with like what is art, and then we'll go into by the end of the year how the careers, and I mean, so it has a curriculum, so that would be what I would put on my timeline. The different topics we discussed throughout the year.
Awesome. Okay, well, I hope you consider it, even if it's not in your classroom, maybe outside. And if it is in your classroom, it could not be that big, right? These are just anchors of time. So one mark on the timeline could be a week, right? So just think about it.
When I love the strategy of aligning it to the focusing question task 2, because those are kind of milestones in that module of what that our students are learning. And I think in another session we've talked about, it could even live above like your board, and that's in that space above your whiteboards in your room. One teacher yesterday said, well, I have 4 walls, so I can do it around the ceiling basically on all 4 walls. And so just something to, like I said, to go back to and kind of build that knowledge is going to be super beneficial. And I'm going to show our last section of the day, respect and rapport with ELs. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is setting high expectations in your classroom and just the importance of that for ESL students specifically. We want to be realistic about what their language production is and what their ability level is as students, right? If my kids are beginning and intermediate, that means that they're not on grade level, right? But we still want to have high expectations for our kids because they are going to be held to high expectations in the curriculum, on the STAR test, on the TELPAS test. And so we want to kind of show them that we, want them to have, we want to have high expectations for their performance in our classrooms, but we also want to be realistic and support them where they need that support, especially that language support in our classrooms as well. But explicitly stating and modeling expectations, and then in turn holding students accountable can help create a classroom of respect. And what I mean by that is a respect for themselves, for the work that they do every day in our classrooms, a respect for each other in our collaborative settings when we're sharing and learning from each other and helping each other get towards a goal. And when I pair a student that has, beginning with an intermediate, that someone that has a little bit, a higher level production of language skills, that kind of embeds that collaborative expectation in my classroom as well. And just saying that to your kids, telling them you have high expectations for them, that you expect a lot out of them, and then modeling what that is. And then if there's a gap between what your expectation is and what they can do independently, that's where we have to work as teachers to figure out, okay, how can we support them with scaffolds in that as they kind of contribute to your class to reach that expectation. So we can model those positive learning environments by putting time not only into relationships with our students, but also to building a sense of agency within them. I want my kids to be their own advocates in their own education. I want them to know that, like, at this point in their career, or in their educational career, they're gonna, as we're leaving elementary and into middle school, they're gonna have to advocate for themselves and have agency over their own performance in your classrooms, and that they need to want to contribute or want to opt in to that participation that's happening in your classroom, because that's how they're going to learn. So being very honest with students about how knowledge is shared and learned in your classroom, and effective teachers talk with students about their progress throughout the year and is able to support them in goal setting. Students should leave the classroom at the end of the year knowing that pushing themselves for growth is something inside of them that they can control. And I know there's going to be a big push on our campus, and I think across the district as well, for the importance of students setting their own goals and tracking their own goals, tracking their own data, reflecting over the goals for the classroom. And those goals can be language aligned in an ELA class, because if you have a ELL that scored in the beginning, scored beginning and speaking, a goal for them might be, I have to raise my hand to answer a question one time a class period, right? You don't want to make it so difficult where that your beginners are overwhelmed by the, accountability of I have to, raise my hand multiple times. Keep it small, keep it simple, push their limits. And then when they can do that, push their limits again. And so after every quarter, we'll revisit those goals and see if we need to adjust them, if they met them. And that is going to teach them how to kind of progress monitor their own learning in your class as well. And all of that kind of goes back to, though, like really having a belief in your kids that they can achieve it, that they can do it, just with a little bit extra added support. So a few other strategies for building classroom rapport. I'm just going to go through them. And if you have a question about one of them, please share out. But building relationships with your students, incredibly important. We know that for classroom management, everything goes back to relationships, especially with middle school kids. Encouraging student perspectives in your class. So in Wit and Wisdom, we want to hear their understanding. We want to hear what they think, their perspective, because we need to know what their background knowledge is, what their current views are, and how that aligns with what we're teaching them. So we want to encourage students to share their perspectives in our classrooms. We want to set and maintain high expectations. Social and emotional learning activities are really important and really beneficial for classrooms. I know sometimes as teachers, it's hard to find time to work those in, but I definitely want to be better this year about setting aside some time to really address those needs, because that kind of pays dividends in your classroom culture. Regular check-ins with your students, that goal setting I just talked about, reflection circles. I want to try to implement this at least once a week, probably on a Friday, to just kind of close out the week and kind of reflect on our learning. And that also, if we're adding something to our timeline, right, that's a good time to kind of reflect on, okay, we're adding something else, which means we've synthesized our learning, we've learned something new, maybe after a focusing question task. And that would be a good way to come in, a good place to implement that. Paying attention to students' nonverbal behavior. So how they communicate with you non-verbally, especially your beginning students who may lack those language skills, and giving them space if they're needing space, but just constantly kind of checking in on them to kind of assess. Asking about their interests, requiring perseverance is a big one in my classroom. They know that when they show up, that we will be working, that we will be trying to achieve a goal, that we have an objective, we have something that we're supposed to be doing for that day. And so that perseverance, really modeling that, and then also just emphasizing that about not giving up, about we're going to try our best, is something that happens in my classroom a lot. And then utilizing empathy and sincerity, and modeling empathy and sincerity for our teenage students, and showing them what it means to be empathetic to other people, what it means to be sincere, not only to them, but to the other people in the class. And that models those expectations for them when they get into those small groups. Again, because I want a collaborative environment in my classroom. Our kids are on different levels, and we have to be realistic. We have to be honest about that, realistic about it, and realistic to our kids too. I have conversations where we talk about how, as one student may not speak as much English, so other students may speak more English, so we might see that this is what these students are going to do, this task is what these other group of students are going to do. We might partner up and help other people. We may do a partner write where they're talking about the ideas, but with a higher production of written language, that student may be scribing more. Having those conversations and being honest with their kids, but also being empathetic and sincere. And again, modeling that for them is a really good way to build that classroom rapport as well. So those are some strategies that I have. Any questions about any of those before we move on to our last discussion question?
I want to point out encouraging student perspectives. So asking your students what they think about things will give you so much information. It'll let you know where they're at and maybe where their interests lie in a text, okay? Because you can guide your lessons to kind of swerve to get their engagement so that they're on board. If you stick to where your perspective is, then your students are just going to be checked out. So you have to pay attention when students are bored, when students are not engaged. You have to get feedback from them. So encouraging them to speak up and to give their opinions is only benefiting you. You're getting like free data. So. Okay, so this is our final discussion question, and we encourage you to unmute yourself. I mean, I know it's the end of the day, and we're all just like, I'm so tired. But we want to hear what you think. So which strategies are you most likely to implement in your classroom this coming school year? And you can start with this sentence starter if you would like. This coming school year, I want to implement. And it could be something that maybe that's not in our presentation, but something in our presentation sparked it. So I'm very curious as to what you're most likely to implement in your classroom, because we can learn from each other when we have this discussion. I know there was a lot today. But if you could just choose one, which one do you think that you could implement in your classroom this year to help support your English learner students especially?
So this coming school year, I would like to implement the timeline. I think it is to have a visual up somewhere in the room for ELLs to just remind them of their learning and what they've learned so far. It can be encouraging to let them know that you've done it, up to this point already. And then it can, sometimes we just have a lapse in memory and we just need a quick refresher. And so I just think having that visible and then optional for them to use, I think that would be just a great asset in the classroom.
I would like to share, there's like 3 that I think would be great. The timeline, and changing up on anchor charts. We've always done anchor charts, but I never thought about the different ones that you shared. So I might even put like something about art history on a anchor chart, or the masters or painters, on an anchor chart. I never thought about doing that. And I like the idea that you kept your KWL chart throughout the year for them to interact with questions. I thought that was good. Definitely the KWL.
Awesome.
Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
I would say for me, I really liked the Google picture activity. I think that's something, I mean, especially for our kids, the picture ties in everything. If they can visually see it, that's what sticks in their mind more so than just the words on the page, the words on my little anchor chart. So I want to try to implement that this school year.
And I want to add to that, you can also, it's beneficial if you have the students explain why they chose that picture, because that helps them also internalize the meaning of the word that they're looking at. And the explanation, when students repeat things that you have said, all the students listen more. When you say it, it's like, meow, 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 right? So when students are explaining to the class, they're teaching. So they're contributing to the knowledge. So that's just a great thing that you can add on to that.
For sure.
Okay, we all survived today. The second day of the SEED conference. Is everyone tired? Are you tired? Was it hard to get up I know, was it hard to get up this morning though? Because you haven't had to get up for, yeah. Well, we really, thank you so much for coming. Ms. Devick's gonna put the attendance link, she already has, in the chat. So we invite you to fill out this form so that you can get your attendance counted. Also, this form, there will be a drawing for a goodie bag. Let me see if I have it. Yeah, it's right here. I don't know if it'll show. It's a cool tote. It has like the little SEED conference logo. There's a zipper here and then a zipper here. It's very cool. Lots of books and goodies in it. They're going to choose one or a couple of people every day, and by 5 o'clock you'll get an email if you're a winner. Also, I invite you to fill out the survey that's in PowerSchool. You'll have about 7 days to do it so that you can get your certificate. Was there anything else, Ms. Devick?
Yes, I'm going to drop in the chat a code for the Schoology group where all of these resources will be housed. So in that group, they'll have all the SEED presenters are putting in their presentations, their Google Slides, their videos of their sessions, any other resources. So we have a folder in that group. Not everything is updated yet, all of the presentations in there, but we'll go back and add all of the resources, the breakout room document, so that picture hunt that we did, that'll be in there. There will be videos of the sessions themselves. And so we just want to make sure that it is not a course in Schoology, it is a group. So if you put that code in, it's not going to take, and for the course section, it won't take you to the right place. So go to your groups. At the top, there's a bar at the top of your Schoology that should say a button that says groups, and you should have a place within that to put in that access code. Join the group, and then you'll have access to all of the resources for the SEED conference.
Great. And so here are our email addresses. You can email us anytime. We love answering questions. We're teachers. So, but are there any questions today so far? Was there anything that you had questions about that maybe we could explain a little bit, or maybe something you want to use it in a certain way? Maybe that will work. Just let us know if you have any questions. If you don't have any questions, you're good to go. And you can
enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciated it. So yeah, if you don't have a question, you're free to go. If you do, feel free.
Bye guys. Thank you.
Bye, Miss Need. Bye, Miss Faust.
Alrighty.